Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes. We're in the second chapter, and we've had a very sad and shocking reminder this week of the message of Solomon, as we have again experienced another tragedy here in the United States in relationship to death. You remember in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, Solomon pursued life from an intellectual perspective. And having pursued it intellectually, he came to the conclusion that vanity of vanity, life is meaningless. In the beginning of chapter 2, he pursued it experientially. He tried to grab all the gusto that he could to go around life, not just once, but many, many times. And after having experienced the things that the world has to offer, again he cries out, vanity of vanities, life is meaningless and all is vanity. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and beginning at verse 12, he says, "Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly." Now, the background of the book of Ecclesiastes, written by Solomon, in part, is the book of Proverbs, because Solomon likes to talk about characters and about the kind of lives that they exhibit. And so I'd like to just review a little bit some of the characters in the book of Proverbs to help us understand the setting. Because when Solomon says, I want to consider wisdom, he's talking in terms of a principled lifestyle. When he talks about madness, he's talking about an unprincipled lifestyle. A lifestyle that has no principles, has no safeguards, has no limits, extreme lifestyle. And then when he speaks of folly, he speaks of a life of just kind of stupid choices. But all the background of this are simply characters from the book of Proverbs. So when you read the book of Proverbs, you can kind of look for some of these characters. Proverbs talks about the simple man. The simple man lacks understanding and requires instruction, has no wisdom, has no understanding. But they're just a simple person, and they require instruction. He will talk about the sluggard. The sluggard has a lazy mental attitude and acts irresponsibly as a life pattern. You see, each and every one of us has a pattern to our lives, something that just simply characterizes us and in a very real way determines where we're going. Solomon speaks of foolishness or folly. He says, the fool despises wisdom and understanding and resists instruction. A foolish person is not teachable. They don't want to understand principles. They don't want to understand spiritual things, and in fact, they reject them. A little more intimidating and stronger than the fool is the scoffer. The scoffer is more active in Solomon's characteristic style of people. The scoffer rejects wisdom and understanding and refuses instruction. A person who is a scoffer by character is a person who wants to enter into discussion, but not for the purpose of learning, but for the purpose of debate and disproving spiritual things. Solomon also talks about the criminal. The criminal entices to evil, devises mischief, talks perversely, but his end is death. You see, as Solomon looked at life and looked at his kingdom and looked at all the different people, he understood that there is a pattern to each person's life, a character that lives itself out, and that people need to change and follow a different way of lifestyle. Now, Solomon talks about the strange woman. I don't know, she does look strange, not particularly attractive. But he speaks of the strange woman. The strange woman seduces the simple, destroys his soul, and leads into paths of death. He also speaks of what we would call the playboy. The playboy kind of lifestyle is driven by his lusts, which leads to his destruction. Solomon also talks about some good folks, though. For instance, the man of integrity. The man of integrity loves what is right and pleasing to God and receives protection and wisdom from God. And then finally, by way of review, he speaks of the wise person. The wise person loves wisdom and understanding and receives instruction. You see, Solomon understood that each and every one of us is a character, and that our character shapes our destiny. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, beginning at verse 12, he says, "Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom, a principled lifestyle, and also madness, an unprincipled lifestyle, and folly, a life that simply continually makes bad decisions." He says, "What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly. A principled life is better than an unprincipled life. Just as light is better than darkness, it's much nicer to walk around in the light than it is in the darkness. I personally love the summer days when we have lots of light and little darkness. And so light is better than darkness." Verse 14, "The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks around in darkness. But I came to the realization that the same fate overtakes both of them." Yes, Solomon is saying you can live life however you want to. In the words of that great Italian philosopher and singer, Frank Sinatra, you can do it my way. But whatever way you do it, the end is always the same. For death overtakes each and every one of us. Verse 15, "Then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. I'm wise. I'm intelligent. I'm wealthy. I'm powerful. And yet, death is still going to overtake me. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart. This too is meaningless, for the wise man, like the fool, will no longer be remembered. In days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too must die." Yes, in life, death is the great equalizer. There is no amount of medicine, no amount of intelligence, no amount of wisdom, no amount of power, no amount of prestige, no amount of wealth, or any other earthly thing that can stop death. It's interesting that people throughout history have wanted to be remembered. You think about the pyramids, all built by tens of thousands of slaves simply so the pharaohs could be remembered and go on into what they believed was some kind of afterlife. I think about Stalin. You know, Stalin erected statues of himself throughout the communist world because he wanted to be remembered. But as soon as the Iron Curtain fell, so did all of his statues. Lenin's body, which remains in state, preserved, that somehow he might preserve his legacy, is but a reminder of brutality and dark days gone by. Yes, life for Solomon was very, very frustrating because of a lack of eternal significance. If life does not count for eternity, what is the present or the lasting value? Think about it for a moment as Solomon writes to us. If life is simply annihilation or extinction, if when we die there is nothing after this, then what is the value or the significance of life? For those who hold no value of eternity, no belief in an afterlife, that life is only what exists here and now, and when it ends, it simply stops and ceases. For these folks, very often then, life now becomes cheap and expendable. Euthanasia, infanticide, abortion, sex selection, and as we have seen in Kosovo, ethnic cleansing. If we do not believe that there is something after this life, then life becomes very, very meaningless. In verse 17, he says, "So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless and a chasing after the wind." If there is no eternal significance, if there is no long-term recognition, Solomon is so frustrated. He says, then why am I working so hard? Why am I so stressed out and busy with life? I have accomplished so many things, and we read about many of them in the beginning of chapter 2. He built parks, he built homes, he had slaves, he had a large harem, he had a great kingdom, he built cities throughout his empire, he had great commerce and travel. The world came to him to hear his words. And yet all of that meant nothing to him if there was not some kind of long-lasting significance or eternal perspective to it. Verse 18, "I hated all the things that I had toiled for under the sun," he says, "because I must leave them to the one who comes after me." This was very frustrating to Solomon. I've built up this huge empire and kingdom. And you know what? When I'm gone, I'm going to have to leave it to somebody. I've done a lot of funerals in my days, and I'm sure you folks have attended funerals in your days. Have you ever noticed hooked up to the back of the hearse a U-Haul? No. You don't get to take it with you. Even though the great pharaohs of Egypt tried to build their pyramids and store their treasures in their structures, they didn't last. Grave robbers went in and took them. And those that weren't taken by grave robbers, like the King Tut tomb, just laid there and accumulated dust. Solomon is quite frustrated. I hated all these things. Verse 19, "And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool?" That would be even harder for Solomon to take. If I've got to leave my inheritance, at least let it be to a wise person, not to a fool. Yet he will control all of the work into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun, and this too is meaningless. Solomon is writing Ecclesiastes towards the close of his life, and he is very, very frustrated that all of the work and all of the effort that he has created might someday go to a fool, to somebody he doesn't even know. One of the things I think we need to ask ourselves as parents sometimes is, what impact will an inheritance have on my heirs? A lot of times, we in American culture, we're gathering up everything we can for the end. Yes, we want to use it in retirement, but we want to make sure when we get to the end that we got some left over. The old adage is what? The one who has the most toys at the end is the biggest winner. Solomon would say, no, I think they're the biggest loser, because they've worked so hard to accumulate all of this stuff, and in order to accumulate all of this stuff, they've paid a price. They've paid a price of time. They've paid a price of effort. They didn't just get all that stuff without working for it, so they have traded time and work for something else. In order to get this, you have to give up something over here. And Solomon says the accumulation of all of this wealth, it's frustrating, because you just don't know who you're going to give it to, and you don't know what impact it's going to have. The Bible teaches us that money is the root of all kinds of evil. So I ask my question, why do we want to give it to anyone? Now, I think we should give it, but we need to examine how we give it and what is its impact going to be. When I was growing up, they had this old program. I haven't even seen it on Nickelodeon. It's probably that old, called The Millionaire. Anybody remember that old program, The Millionaire? Please don't date yourselves. It was a really great storyline. This millionaire, sitting in this big, luxurious office, would periodically pick somebody randomly and give him $1 million. Now, $1 million, when I was a little kid, was a lot of money. Nowadays, $1 million, get you by a few years. I would try, but it just isn't what it used to be. And they would give this $1 million to these different families or people. But the theme was always the same, that the people didn't have the ability to control the money, they didn't have the ability to spend the money, and often what it ended up doing was splitting the family or splitting relationships, and really brought them harm. And in the end, they found out that money was not what was of most importance, but relationships and friendships and community were of the greatest importance. And that, in part, is what Solomon is very frustrated about. I have gathered all of these things, but I can't take them with me. And will they cause people to remember me? And who's going to get them after I'm gone? And what are they going to do with my toys and my things that I have built? Verse 20, he says, so my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. You see, as Solomon stands and looks back at his life now and all of his accomplishments and all the things that he's built and acquired and done, and he looks back at them now, he's very frustrated because he is realizing that those were not the best choices. Verse 21, for a man may do his work with wisdom and knowledge and skill, and then he must leave all that he owns to someone who has not worked for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. To give to our children or our heirs without responsible controls and training is doing them no service at all. Now, when I was in Dallas and working as a youth pastor there, my wife and I had an interesting opportunity, in a sense almost to observe an experiment. In our church, we had about 25 or 30 young people, everything from upper class down to lower upper class to upper middle class to middle class families. And one of the things that we noticed was that children who were just given and given and given and didn't work for things or learn responsibility or learn accountability were children who became very socially dysfunctional. But kids who were taught responsibility and to work for life and to work for things and to appreciate things were kids who you could see had kind of a successful character for the future. I'm not saying they're going to make a lot of money, but they were kids who enjoyed life. They were kids who knew how to handle things. They were kids who had self-control. And I think as Solomon looks back on his life, he's saying, this is so frustrating. I have worked for all of this stuff, and now I'm just going to give it away. Verse 22, what does a man get for all the toil and anxious striving with which he labors under the sun? Notice that word, anxious striving. Work and toil and business and wealth and all of that involves a lot of stress. Verse 23, all his days his work is pain and grief. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is meaningless. Have you ever lost a night's sleep because of work? Have you ever lost a week's sleep because of work? Solomon, I think, is trying to tell us that as he looks at life, work is not all that it's cracked up to be. Succeeding and promotions and moving forward is not everything that we think it should be. And for Solomon, as he looks at all of his accomplishments and all that he has done, he is reminded that he's going to give it away. And it's not going to have the impact that he anticipated. Now, I'm reminded of some very, very wealthy people in America who might be people that we could look at their lifestyle and maybe learn something from. Ted Turner. Ted Turner recently said that he would give $1 billion away. Now, that was a phenomenal gift, don't you think? $1 billion. $100 million a year for 10 years. Now, Ted Turner can afford to do that. But, that was in a sense kind of generous. But when you began to listen to Ted Turner, he had a purpose in doing that. He wanted to go into the annals of history as the greatest giver of all time. And that was his motivation. He wanted to be known for eternity as the great giver. His motivation wasn't pure charity. His motivation wasn't care and concern only for the United Nations children. Just like Solomon, he wanted to be remembered. He wanted to go down in posterity. And you know it because he turned around and he challenged all the other wealthy people to do the same thing. Do you remember that? I'll never forget the words of Donald Trump. Donald Trump says, well, yes, I'm going to be as generous as Ted Turner, and I do plan on doing some great charitable works also, but I'm going to do it when I die, because I need to keep the wealth to continue to create wealth so that I can give more away in the future. Hello, Donald. When you die, you lose it all anyways, right? What's this big generosity? You're going to lose it anyways, guy. You can't take it with you. Tom Monahan of Domino's Pizza recently announced that he's going to give hundreds of millions away while he is still alive to education, to religious education. And everybody, in a sense, felt, really bad there for a little while for the family. Like, man, oh man, he's giving 500, 600 million away. What about the family? Well, the family got 300 million already. But Tom doesn't want to give him any more. He feels that he can invest it. And so that's kind of a good thing. But then you look at people like Bill Gates. Bill Gates gives $1 million here, $1 million there. Hey, that's chump change. I mean, I don't mean to be rude. But that's like dropping coins out of our pockets, kind of thing. But people want to be generous at times. But often it's because they want to have a mark for their own ego and for eternity. Yes, from the pharaohs of the past to the Trumps of today, people want to use their money so that they are known for eternity. And yet, Solomon says, you know what? When it all comes down, everybody is forgotten. Notice what it says in verse 24, though. He says, a man can do nothing better than to eat and to drink and to find satisfaction in his work. That's the advice that Solomon is giving us today. Don't work your whole life to accumulate things. Don't allow your work to be so grievous and so hard and so stressful just to acquire things. But more importantly, we ought to enjoy life. It is nothing better than to eat and to drink and to find some satisfaction in your work. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. For without Him, without God, who can eat or enjoy life? To the man who pleases God, God gives wisdom and knowledge and happiness. Now, previously, Solomon was pursuing what? He was pursuing wisdom and madness and folly. But he says, you know what? If you will seek to please God in your life and pursue God, God will give you wisdom, principles. God will give you knowledge, spiritual information, and God will give you happiness. The Hebrew word for happiness means a joy, a gladness, a glad rejoicing in life. Only God can bring the inner peace, the inner joy, the inner love, the inner fulfillment for life so that it is not stressful, dissatisfying, meaningless, and despairing, but that it is fulfilling. To the man who pleases God, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, the person who is leaving God out of their lives, He gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless and chasing after the wind. I don't know where Donald Trump is spiritually. I don't know where Ted Turner is spiritually. I don't know where a lot of these folks are spiritually. But all of their charity, all of their giving, all of their money means absolutely nothing for their eternal future. What shall it profit a person if they gain the whole world but lose their soul? And none of that money can bring genuine satisfaction and fulfillment to the soul. And Solomon is trying to warn the people, don't do what I did. I pursued riches and wealth and power and prestige and things, and when it's all over, I realized that it is meaningless and simply chasing after the wind. Beloved, it is better to live life with less than to die with stress. And the young people here today, don't be caught up into the American way of life that every generation is convinced is the way of happiness, and that is the pursuit of things instead of the pursuit of God. And if you learn to pursue God, God will allow you to have those things as you can control them, and He will guide and He will direct you as to the proper use and value of them in life. Again, better to live life with less than to die with stress. Because if you want more and more and more, and you are working yourself to death, that stress is going to take its toll. God wants us to enjoy life day to day. And enjoyment of life does not depend upon things. Yes, it's great to have the basics of life, and maybe even a few creature comforts. But don't feel that life finds its fulfillment in those things. Better to enjoy work and life than be enslaved to work and things. I think Solomon would say, possess your possessions. Don't be possessed by your possessions. Now, there's a wonderful proverb that he wrote in Proverbs chapter 30 that gives kind of a balance, I think, to life. He says, 2 things I ask of you, O Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me, that is truth and integrity. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. What we want to ask from God is not for everything, but simply for what we need, what we can control, what we can manage, what we can responsibly hang on to. The essence is found in the words of Jesus when He says, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it in its fullness or in its abundance. And that is living life in light of eternity. What frustrated Solomon so much in his life towards the end was that he had spent his time and energy on things that did not count for eternity. For his own prestige, for his own power, for his own personal well-being. Instead of receiving life in each and every day as a gift from God, to be enjoyed and to be used for His honor and glory. There is a hidden curriculum in American culture, and that hidden curriculum is constantly telling us, acquire things, acquire things. Do you want to be happy in life? Graduate from high school, go to college, or go to a trade school, get a good job, make a lot of money, buy a lot of things, and your soul will be satisfied. And it is a great deception and a great lie. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Life takes on total perspective and enjoyment when we pursue God and pursue relationships through Him in Jesus Christ. The one who dies with the most toys is not the great winner, but the great deceived loser. And I hope that we will not trade time with God for time with things. That we will not trade time with people for time with things. That we will not be workaholics for our own glory, but that we will be servants of Jesus Christ for God's honor and glory. Let's pray.